Hi, it's Marcia Sirota, and today I want to talk about how we can maintain our emotional well-being in this time of COVID-19. So there are a lot of things that people do when faced with very stressful and uncertain times, but two things in particular are not good choices. And these two things are going into a panic or going into denial. Now, these are typical kinds of reactions when people are faced with something that's anxiety provoking, but both of them can get us into trouble. I'm going to start with denial first. So when we're in denial, we tell ourselves that the problem is really not there, that everything is fine and we can carry on as usual. But in a time like this, carrying on like usual can really create a lot of problems because it's becoming clear that the virus is being transmitted by asymptomatic carriers. And that means that people who don't have symptoms are walking around infecting people who are, unbeknownst to them, catching the virus. And then they, in turn, are spreading the virus to other people. And eventually it can be caught by somebody who is high risk. So we don't want to be in denial because we can be putting people down the road at risk because of our irresponsible behavior. And if people say, oh, I'm fearmongering or I'm overreacting, it's not true. It's simply the way the science works. Many people will be infected without having symptoms, and if they're not careful and if they don't practice social distancing and good hygiene, like coughing into your sleeve and washing your hands all the time, for 20 seconds at least, then there is that greater risk of spreading. And that's possibly what happened in Europe because people were out socializing more. So we need to learn from the mistakes of the other countries who've been hit harder before us and stop being in denial. Start just facing the facts that this is here, it's here to stay for at least a while, and we had better be responsible so that we don't put other people at risk. And, the more people who get sick, we have to realize the longer it's going to take for everything to settle down. So if we self-isolate now, the likelihood is that we will have a shorter course of the illness. Whereas if we're going about business as usual, then things will be extended and it will take that much longer for life to go back to normal. So for purely selfish purposes, don't be in denial. Start taking responsibility now. Self-isolate if you can. Practice social distancing, if you can't completely isolate yourself. And it is likely that the course of the illness will be shortened. And now in terms of panic, that's a whole other thing. It's easy to panic when we're uncertain, when the information is changing all the time, and when we feel out of control. But we have to remember that control is impossible. We cannot actually be in control of anything ever. And in times like this, it's just a reminder of how little control we have. So what we need to do is, instead of trying to control things, we need to actually accept the reality, which is that right now there is this pandemic going on. We can make sure to take care of our mental well-being by meditating, doing yoga and breathing exercises, by making sure we get enough sleep and rest, and taking time away from social media so that we don't inundate ourselves with scary information. Especially at bedtime, the last thing we want to do is be checking our phone for updates just before we go to sleep and start giving ourselves bad dreams. So it's really important not to panic, because the other thing that panic does is it makes us make bad decisions. When we're panicking, we regress, which means that we revert to our childlike mentality. And that makes us do things that are irrational and illogical and very often could be hurtful to ourselves or others. For example, I heard this story just last week from a colleague of mine who said that in Belleville, Ontario, which is a small town, there was a run on products at the grocery store, and people were in the store and stealing items from each other's carts and then having fights, and they had to call the police into the grocery store to break up the fights. Now, that's a bad enough situation, but imagine if any of these people were infected with COVID-19, that kind of panic would have led to some people getting infected who otherwise wouldn't have been. So panicking makes us have poor judgment and a lack of insight, and then we can get ourselves into more danger. So we need to remain calm. Yes, it's a scary time. I'm not saying don't be afraid. It's normal to be afraid, but we don't have to become in a panic state and then make decisions which we will regret later on. So this is my update for today. Stay tuned for more videos on the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm hoping to give you some tips to alleviate some of your anxiety and just help you feel better at this very difficult time.